China has $3.4 trillion in foreign reserves, the world's largest trade network, and a payment system that already moves money without touching a single dollar. And it still can't replace it. Here's why. In October 2022, a man named Yi Gong, the former governor of the People's Bank of China, watched America freeze $300 billion of Russian sovereign reserves in 72 hours. No court order, no treaty, no warning. And he had one thought. China has more than 10 times the amount sitting in the same system. This is the story this video is about. Let's be honest about something first, because if you're going to understand why China can't replace a dollar, you need to first understand why. On paper, it absolutely should have by now. China is the world's largest trading nation, not by a small margin, by an enormous one. In 2023, China traded with over 140 countries that do more business with Beijing than they do with Washington. 140 countries. The Belt and Road Initiative have put Chinese infrastructure, ports, railways, power plants, fiber optic cables into over 150 countries. Chinese money has built the roads. Chinese companies run the ports. Chinese banks hold the debt. China has a digital yuan. It is live, being piloted across major cities, tested with foreign central banks, and built specifically to move money across borders without touching the American financial system. Then there's mBridge, the payment network we covered in a previous video, the one that moves real money between China, the UAE, Hong Kong, and Thailand without using a single dollar or SWIFT messaging system. That system has now completed its first commercial live pilot. Real banks, real transactions, real work. It works. So, here's the question that should be keeping Washington awake at night. China has the trade relationships. China has the infrastructure. China has the alternative payment rails. China has the motive, arguably the strongest motive of any country on earth. So why, in 2026, does the dollar account for 57% of global foreign exchange reserves, and the yuan just 1.9%? Why hasn't it happened? Here's what China's own economists know, but won't say in public. The yuan's biggest obstacle isn't the dollar, it's Beijing. Yi Gong's team ran the calculation for every country that had considered shifting reserves away from the dollar. 140 potential partners. Every single one of them hit the same wall. To understand that wall, you need to understand what a reserve currency actually requires. It's not about strength. It's not about size. Not even about trust in the abstract. It's about one very specific thing: the ability to leave. Here's the math. If I'm the central bank of Brazil and I decide to park $50 billion of my reserves in yuan, I need to know with absolute certainty that I can get that money out in full whenever I want without asking anyone's permission. That's the foundation of every reserve currency that has ever existed. The holder must be able to exit freely. Now, every yuan that crosses China's border is controlled by the People's Bank of China. Every outflow is monitored, gated, and subject to approvals. Every large capital movement requires permission. The system is called capital control, and China runs some of the most comprehensive ones on earth. Think about what that actually means in practice. The more countries hold yuan, the more they'll eventually want to move it, invest it, convert it, pull it home in crisis. Which means China will have to let capital flow freely across its borders. And the moment it does that, it loses control of its own currency. Foreign money floods in when times are good, and floods out when they're not. The exchange rate swings. The financial system destabilizes. Everything Beijing spent 40 years carefully managing comes apart. China's capital controls are not policies they could simply vote away. They are the architecture of how the entire Chinese financial system functions. Remove them, and you don't just open the yuan, you destabilize 40 years of managed growth. Here's what this means in practice. Every country that has considered holding significant yuan reserves has run the same calculations. What if there is a crisis? What if Beijing restricts outflow the way it did in 2015, when the capital was fleeing China and the government slammed the gates shut? That 2015 episode is worth pausing on. In 8 months, China burned through nearly $1 trillion of its own foreign reserves, trying to defend the yuan as money fled the country. When the pressure became too great, the gates closed. If you were holding yuan when that happened, you waited. No central bank in the world will store its national savings in a currency where the exit can be closed overnight. The trust problem isn't whether China is powerful. It's about whether China will let you leave. And right now the honest answer is only if Beijing decides to. If this is the kind of video you find yourself thinking about, the hidden architecture underneath the headlines, subscribe. This channel is built exactly for that. Yigong understood the trust problem immediately. He'd watched it destroy nearly $1 trillion of reserves in 2015. But even in his most optimistic scenario, where Beijing somehow solves the capital control overnight, his analysis kept arriving at the same conclusion. Even if you trusted the yuan completely, even if you were certain Beijing would never close the gates, you'll still need somewhere to put it. This is a depth problem, and it is one that economists talk about the least, because it's the least dramatic, but it might be the most overwhelming. Here's the thing America cannot say out loud, and here's the thing China cannot say out loud either. They both need the system to stay exactly as it is. The dollar's reserve status doesn't rest on American military power, or American soft power, or even American economic size. It rests on one specific thing: the US Treasury market. $30 trillion in liquid, globally tradable, instantly accessible bonds. The deepest, most liquid financial market in human history. A market so deep that the Bank of Japan can sell $200 billion of treasury in a single quarter, and the price barely moves. That depth is what makes the dollar safe to hold. Because safety doesn't mean the dollar will never lose value. Safe means when you need to sell, there will always be a buyer. Now look at the yuan equivalent. China's bond market is large in absolute terms, about $20 trillion. Structurally, it is almost entirely closed. Foreign ownership of Chinese government bonds is capped at roughly 3%. Capital flow in and out through a tightly controlled quota system. There is no depth, no open liquid market where a foreign central bank can park 300 billion yuan and expect it to sell freely at any time without moving the price. And here's the trap that makes this wall impossible to solve quickly. To create that depth, to build the open, liquid, accessible bond market that the reserve currencies require, China would need to open its capital account fully. And we just spent 5 minutes explaining exactly why this is the one thing Beijing cannot do without risking the stability of its entire financial system. The last time capital moved freely in and out of China, they burned through $1 trillion in 8 months, just trying to hold the line. So the gates stay closed, the trust problem stays, the depth problem stays. Every path leads back to the same locked door. But here's what they found behind the door. And this is the part that makes the whole thing irreversible. Forget the walls for a moment. Assume Beijing somehow solved both. Capital controls lifted overnight. Bond markets opened. The yuan flows freely across every border on earth. What happens next? This is the question Yigang's team couldn't answer clearly, because the answer is not good for China. Here's the thing that America cannot admit. And here's the thing that China cannot admit either. China's entire economic model. The model that lifted 800 million people out of poverty, that built the world's largest manufacturing base, that turned a developing country into the second largest economy on earth in 40 years. That model runs on the dollar system. Let me show you exactly how. China exports more than it imports. Enormous surplus every year for decades. Those surplus dollars flow into China, get converted into yuan, and get recycled into the US Treasury, into the Belt and Road Initiative, into the foreign reserve that Beijing watches over. Now, what happens if the yuan becomes a true global currency? More countries holding yuan means more global demand for it. more demand means the yuan strengthens against the dollar, and a strong yuan means Chinese goods become more expensive for the rest of the world to buy. Orders start going elsewhere, factories start losing contracts. The export engine that built the modern China starts to stall. This is why the Japanese yen never became a global currency, despite Japan being the second largest economy in the world for decades. This is the Plaza Accord story. When America forced Japan to strengthen its yen in 1985, Japan's exports collapsed. The asset bubble inflated, and then it popped. Japan spent 30 years recovering. China watched it happen. Beijing has studied the playbook obsessively, and they know exactly what a freely floating, globally dominant yuan would do to their manufacturing base. So here's the trap: Pan Gongsheng, Yi Gong's successor, now running the same institution at the same strategy. So here's the trap: Pan Gongsheng, Yi Gong's successor, now running the same institution and the same strategy, cannot escape. Not just a wall, a trap, because this one means China cannot even want to solve the first two problems. Keep the dollar system, China's manufacturing advantage survives, but $2.4 trillion in foreign reserves remain exposed to American weaponization. Replace the dollar system, China's financial sovereignty increases, but the export engine that made China rich starts to stall. There is no clear move. The system China wanted to escape is the same system that got China here. Tighten the grip on the yuan. The manufacturing advantage holds, but the vulnerability remains. Loosen the grip on yuan, the vulnerability shrinks. So does the engine. Sounds familiar? One more thing before I let you go. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel is built for. Subscribe. There is a lot more where it came from, and the next one goes somewhere you won't expect.